What if the life you dream of isn't something you're building, but something you're remembering? In a universe where time folds and identity shapes reality, the path to manifestation is not linear effort, but quantum alignment. Let's slow everything down, unclench your mind, soften your breath. Let this be your invitation to sit with stillness, not as a break from life, but as the place it begins. Take a moment and feel your own presence. Where are you listening from right now? What time is it in your world? Let the scene form gently. You resting in quiet awareness, while the deeper truth hums beneath every heartbeat. This story isn't about chasing, it's about tuning. The old way of striving fades. In its place rises a remembering that you are not a seeker of change, but a signal of it. That you do not become your desires. You embody the version of you who already lives them. And as you do, the world rearranges itself, not as reward, but reflection. Welcome to the frequency where now bends, where the future no longer waits, where reality listens to who you are, not what you want. Welcome to your return. Most people believe they are on a journey towards something greater, slowly trudging up a slope that no one can quite see, but everyone insists is there. Each goal is treated like a summit. Each affirmation is a step etched into invisible stone. The world teaches us that life is a long upward push toward worthiness, and we must earn every inch of progress through discipline, belief, and the right emotional performance. You are told to declare what you want, envision it clearly, act as though it's already yours, and then perhaps the universe will approve of your signal and deliver a response. But what if the destination isn't ahead at all? What if the summit isn't some distant point on a higher timeline, but something already behind you, something already complete, waiting to be remembered rather than created? What if the key to manifestation has never been forward motion, but a soft reversal, not becoming, but returning? The deeper mechanics of reality don't follow the paths we've memorized. Energy does not move in straight lines. Time does not unfold like dominoes. And identity, your sense of who you are, is not something built moment by moment like a staircase. It is a frequency, always broadcasting, always tuned. Most of us were trained to seek. We were told to long for a better self, to chase after healed, abundant, glowing versions of ourselves, as if they lived on the other side of some great test. But here is the strange truth. Every time you say, "I want to be happy," or "I want to be free," you are speaking from the frequency of not having. You are sending a message to the field that the version of you who holds those qualities is elsewhere, not now, not here. And the quantum field, endlessly obedient, perfectly reflective, sends back exactly what you encoded, the experience of not having, of almost but not quite, of reaching for a horizon that never arrives. This is not punishment. This is resonance. The universe isn't deciding whether or not to grant your wish. It is simply responding to your signature. Because energy responds not to language, but to frequency. The field doesn't understand words. It understands coherence. And coherence means your thoughts, emotions, and state of being are aligned. It means you're not just thinking about abundance, but feeling it, breathing it, expecting it, as if it were already woven into your now. Because here's the twist. It already is. Every version of your life that could ever exist already does. Your healthiest body, your most loving relationship, your deepest peace, they are not future destinations. They are present options. And you, the observer, are the tuner. You do not manifest by creating something from scratch. You manifest by tuning your signal to match the reality where it already exists. The field doesn't sort reality through cause and effect like a machine. It operates through entanglement, through vibrational match. And when your internal state aligns with the version of you who already holds what you desire, the world bends quietly to reflect that choice. You are not walking toward your dream. Your dream is folding space and time to meet you at the frequency you sustain. But most of us live in the contradiction. We visualize success while fearing failure. We declare love while vibrating loneliness. We repeat affirmations while secretly doubting they work. And that contradiction is not weakness. It is signal confusion. It is why our results are mixed. Because the field is not responding to your strongest hope. It is responding to your most consistent identity. Who are you being most of the time? That's the question. That's the key. Not what you say in meditation. Not what you write in your journal once a day. But who you return to being in the quiet, in the doubt, in the ordinary space between intentions. That identity, the one you autopilot into when no one is watching, is your true frequency. And that's what the world reflects. This is why we often feel like we're touching something real, but never quite holding it. Like the life we dream of is close enough to see, but not close enough to live. The more we reach, the more we confirm that it is not here. And the field, ever loyal to resonance, responds, yes, not here, not yet. So how do we change that? How do we collapse the space between desire and experience? The answer is both simple and radical. We stop trying to close the gap, and instead, we eliminate the idea that there ever was one. This is not wishful thinking. This is quantum truth. When you fully embody the identity of someone who already has what they desire, you are no longer signaling to the field from lack. You are signaling from completion. And the field, like water responding to the shape of a vessel, begins to reconfigure itself accordingly. You become magnetic, not because you are performing magnetism, but because you are no longer leaking. Contradiction. You stop waiting for evidence. You become the evidence. You no longer speak of your dreams in future tense. You speak from them. You don't imagine peace. You walk like someone who knows it. You don't beg for love. You emanate it, and the world, unable to resist coherence, aligns. Not through reward, but through resonance. This isn't about pretending. It isn't about faking gratitude or forcing joy. It's about inhabiting the emotional reality of your chosen self, even if the outer conditions have not yet caught up. Because time, at the quantum level, doesn't operate in sequence. Cause and effect are collaborators, not steps. When you tune into the feeling of having already received, that version of you, the one who has it, begins pulling you toward itself. Reality bends not through effort, but through consistency. And that consistency isn't rigidity. It's awareness. It's the moment you decide, this is who I am now, and stop checking for confirmation. It's the quiet courage to embody your timeline before the world believes you, before the results arrive, before the evidence appears. That is where mastery begins. That is where the old self crumbles, not through rejection, but through irrelevance. You stop feeding the timeline of struggle, and it stops feeding you back. Your old story echoes, sometimes loudly. It will test you. It will ask, are you sure? It will offer you evidence that things haven't changed. But that evidence is not the truth. It is the echo of your former signal, now fading. And your job is not to fight it. Your job is to not become it again. When you remain loyal to your new frequency, even in the face of doubt, delay, or discomfort, you accelerate the collapse of the old and the arrival of the new. Not because you earned it, but because you stopped interrupting it. This is not about controlling reality. It's about becoming so stable in your chosen identity that reality has no choice but to respond. You don't become magnetic by chasing alignment. You become magnetic by becoming the version of you who no longer questions if alignment is necessary. It becomes who you are, not a mood, a memory, not a tactic, a truth. And from that place, everything changes, not because you force change, but because you remembered what it feels like to stop needing it. You remembered what it feels like to be whole before the world says you are. And in that remembering, reality bends not to your will, but to your coherence. There comes a quiet moment, not grand, not traumatic, when you begin to sense it. A shift, not outside you, but within the texture of your own presence. You begin to notice how your thoughts echo differently in your body, how your breath no longer waits for permission to soften, how you no longer need to convince yourself that you're getting closer. Something more mysterious has settled in, not certainty in the mind, but familiarity in the soul, as if the version of you've been trying to become was never missing, only muted. And all the affirmations, all the rituals, all the strategies, they weren't wrong, but they were incomplete. They pointed toward a path, but the path was never forward. It was inward and then downward into the roots of being, where identity is not scripted by thought, but remembered by vibration. You begin to live less like someone trying to arrive, and more like someone who has quietly returned. And that return doesn't look like fireworks or headlines. It looks like stillness. It looks like decisions made without desperation. It looks like walking away from the noise, not because you're avoiding life, but because you've stopped outsourcing your signal to it. You're no longer chasing alignment like it's a temperature you must raise. You've become the thermostat. You've stopped scanning the world for evidence that you're allowed to feel good. You've started feeling good as a way of instructing the world. And that reversal, that subtle inversion of cause and effect, is the essence of quantum reality. In the classical model, we're taught that life happens to us, and we must react, adapt, strive. But in the quantum model, life is shaped by the frequency of the observer, not by their needs or hopes, but by their state of coherence. This means your circumstances do not generate your frequency. Your frequency generates your circumstances. And the more you realize this, the more you begin to treat your internal state not as a reaction to reality, but as the author of it. You become less interested in fixing the outer world and more devoted to refining your inner tuning. Because now you see, reality is not solid, it is responsive. It is a mirror made of liquid light, always rippling to match the pattern of your being. And the mirror doesn't lie, not because it's cruel, but because it's exact. If you look into it expecting to see something other than what you are radiating, you will call it unfair. But if you understand that it has no agenda, only reflection, then you begin to ask not, why isn't it working? But what am I signaling? That question changes everything. It ends the illusion of delay. It dissolves the fantasy of someday. Because once you accept that reality bends to your coherence, then the only delay that remains is the one you, sustained by doubting your own signal. But how do you hold a frequency when life continues to test it? When bills still come, when relationships still fray, when the body still aches? Here lies the edge of mastery, not in avoiding challenge, but in responding to it from the identity you've chosen instead of the one you've memorized. The world will not always agree with your new signal immediately. It may echo your past for a while, but those echoes are not the present. They are vibrations still fading from the last identity you embodied. And when they show up as fear, resistance, or rejection, they are not evidence of failure. They are invitations. They are the question life asks every time you attempt to change. Will you now respond as the new self or revert to the old? In that moment, your answer is not verbal. It is vibrational. It is felt in how you breathe, how you speak, how you stand in the gap between knowing and seeing. That is the true work, and it is subtle. It is not traumatic or performative. It is invisible power. It is the coherence that doesn't shout, but hums steadily, steadily, until the world forgets what you used to be and begins to shape itself around who you've become. And when you respond from that frequency, again and again, something else happens. Time becomes slippery. The timeline you thought you were on begins to unravel. Paths you never imagined begin to unfold. Conversations align with thoughts you haven't spoken aloud. Opportunities arrive without explanation. And you don't feel lucky. You feel remembered. As if the universe has finally caught up to what you knew in your quietest hours. But the truth is, it didn't catch up. You did. You stopped arguing with your signal. You stopped apologizing for your expansion. You stopped hesitating at the doorway of your becoming. You stepped in, fully, softly, and became someone who no longer needed proof. And that choice, made not once but repeatedly, turns ripples into waves. The field begins to bend, not in bursts, but in rhythm. Not with noise, but with symmetry. And you begin to feel a strange sense of inevitability, not because you're arrogant, but because you're aligned. You're no longer seduced by urgency. You're anchored in knowing. You don't panic when things go quiet. You trust the silence. Because you've stopped needing the world to reassure you that you're safe, you've become safety. You've become your own signal. And the signal has become so clean, so uncontradicted, that it begins to override the noise of the old world. That's when the environment changes. That's when relationships shift. That's when your body begins to reflect a new intelligence. Not because it was cured by external intervention, but because it finally had a signal strong enough to follow. The cells respond to coherence. So do people. So does money. So does timing. Everything that once felt stubborn begins to soften. Not because it surrendered, but because you did. You surrendered the old frequency. You stopped feeding the timeline of lack with your attention. You stopped negotiating with a version of you that no longer serves. You started listening to the future that was calling, not ahead, but inward. Because the future, in quantum terms, is not distance, it is depth. A version of you who lives in peace, in abundance, in love. They do not live far away. They live deeper inside you. And when you go inward far enough, you don't just find them. You become them. And then, with the ease of recognition, you begin to act from that place, not as performance, as memory. You remember how to speak as someone who already is. You remember how to walk without asking for permission. You remember that manifestation isn't about commanding reality. It's about cooperating with the version of it that matches your truth. And you remember that truth is not thought. It is frequency. It is what vibrates beneath your words, beneath your plans, beneath your fears. And the field, this infinite intelligence of potential, is always listening, always responding, always mirroring back not what you claim, but what you sustain. So when you sustain coherence, the mirror becomes clear. Life no longer feels random. It feels orchestrated, not by fate, but by frequency, not by force, but by resonance. You become a living invitation to your own destiny. And the path unfolds, not because you chased it, but because you tuned to it. By now, something fundamental has shifted, not just in your understanding, but in the way your presence lands inside your own body. You're no longer scanning for signs, seeking confirmation that reality is listening, because you've realized it always was, not to your words, not to your longing, but to your signal. And that signal, once fragmented and diluted by contradiction, has grown quiet, steady, true. You've stopped broadcasting confusion. You've stopped oscillating between old identities and emerging truths. You've begun to live as someone who remembers, not the steps, not the formulas, but the field itself, the intelligence that holds every possible version of you, waiting not to be summoned, but selected. And selection is no longer effort. It's embodiment. It's the quiet act of choosing to stay. You stay in the frequency of enoughness, even when scarcity knocks. You stay in the identity of healing, even when symptoms scream otherwise. You stay loyal to the version of you who already knows how this story ends, not because you're ignoring reality, but because you're defining it. And that's where the deepest shift occurs, the one that no technique, no script, no visualization can replace. You stop trying to become aligned. You start realizing you already are. Alignment was never a destination. It was a remembering. And remembering, in its truest form, is not intellectual. It's cellular. It's when your nervous system no longer flinches in the presence of desire. It's when your breath doesn't tighten at the idea of more. It's when joy arrives without a trigger. When peace arrives without a reason. When you realize that the identity of your future self is not waiting to be built, it's waiting to be unblocked. All that was ever in the way was noise. And noise, you now see, was never yours. It was inherited from culture, from trauma, from old echoes of a world that forgot its own source. But you've remembered. And in that remembrance, the laws begin to bend. Not because you've mastered the rules, but because you've transcended the illusion that they were rigid. You've seen how time folds, how space responds, how energy listens. And with that knowing, you begin to emit something rare, something unmistakable, not charisma, not charm, but coherence. The kind of coherence that doesn't need to convince anyone of anything. The kind that walks into a room and softens the air. The kind that no longer needs external permission to feel whole. You are no longer sourcing your identity from circumstances. You're sourcing your circumstances from identity. And that identity is no longer a borrowed costume. It's a frequency so familiar it feels like home. This is where sovereignty begins, not as control, but as authorship. Most people live like receivers, absorbing whatever frequency dominates the space, but you have become the broadcaster. You've realized that you are the original signal, the one reality is waiting to harmonize with. You're no longer a reactor. You're a composer, not because you dominate life, but because you've become so still, so tuned, that life can't help but meet you at your pitch. The tests still come, the echoes still visit, but you no longer panic. You no longer shrink into the old version of yourself who needed proof. You remain, and in that remaining, the field rearranges itself to match, not out of generosity, but out of precision. Because frequency is law, it cannot lie, it cannot delay, it cannot withhold, it can only reflect. And the reflection has changed. Because you have. This is where the old story ends. Not in fire or thunder, but in stillness. In the moment you stop reaching. In the moment you stop scripting. In the moment you stand inside the reality that once felt distant and realize, I am it. I am the one who holds the signal. I am the one who chose. And everything that arrives now is not reward. It is recognition. It is the mirror finally clear. It is the echo of a signal no longer distorted. And so you begin to walk through the world differently. You no longer speak from hope. You speak from presence. You no longer question if you'll get there. You live as if you already have. You don't adjust your frequency based on circumstance. You adjust circumstance by sustaining your frequency. And people notice, not because you shine louder, but because you hum truer. They feel it in the silence between your words, in the steadiness of your gaze, in the way you don't flinch when reality seems slow, because you've left the timeline of rush. You've entered the rhythm of knowing, and knowing has no urgency. It only has resonance, and resonance is what bends time. It is what calls futures home. It is what turns coincidence into choreography. The world begins to conspire, not because you asked, but because you've become undeniable. And in that new gravity, you realize this was never about tricks, never about secrets. It was about the courage to stop collapsing your frequency for a world that forgot how to listen. It was about returning fully, steadily, to the truth you've always carried, that you are not here to earn your life. You are here to express it, not to prove yourself to the field, but to mirror it. Not to wait for change, but to be the change in motion. You no longer chase the vision. You are the vessel. You no longer seek the path. You are the map. And reality, fluid, faithful, wild, will continue to bend itself around the signal you choose. Not someday. Not soon. Now, the farther you go into this remembrance, the less you find yourself needing to explain it to others. The less you feel called to defend your shifts or justify your peace. You've become fluent in a language most forget how to speak. The language of the field, the dialogue of energy, of vibration, of embodied knowing. And in this frequency, you're not louder, you're clearer. Not because the noise of the world has disappeared, but because it no longer enters you. You've created space, real, internal space, where the outer world doesn't dictate. Your pulse. And this space is not isolation. It is sovereignty. In this space, you notice something strange happening with time. Days stretch and fold, not according to calendars, but according to coherence. Sometimes entire weeks feel like a breath. Other moments feel vast and suspended, like eternity tucked into a blink. You meet someone, and it feels like a script written long ago. You think of something, and the opportunity arrives before you've spoken it aloud. You no longer plan with urgency. You plan with precision. Because you know that the field is always listening, not for your timeline, but for your tone. You've stopped begging for ease and started being ease. And ease becomes the signal. Not passivity, but precision without pressure. You begin to see life as less of a maze and more of a mirror, one that reflects not just what you think, but what you hold consistently. The field isn't judging you. It doesn't assign moral value to your frequency. It doesn't punish doubt or reward hope. It simply reflects. So when you raise your frequency, not by force, but by return, you're not manipulating reality. You're becoming compatible with the version of it that's been waiting for you. And in this compatibility, the resistance fades. You no longer struggle to stay positive. You've stopped clinging to temporary highs. You've rooted yourself in something quieter than happiness, resonance. And resonance is less performative. It doesn't always look joyful. Sometimes it looks like stillness. Sometimes it feels like silence. But underneath it all, there's a thrum, a soft hum that doesn't rise and fall with the news or your bank account or your follower count. It's not reactive. It's generative. This hum becomes your home frequency. And from it, life begins to flow differently. Ideas arrive already formed. Synchronicities multiply. You get up from rest and answers are waiting. You speak and people hear the frequency behind your words. The right ones respond. The wrong ones fall away, not in drama, but in quiet misalignment. You don't need to push people out. You've simply stopped vibrating in the rooms you've outgrown. You no longer negotiate with timelines that aren't yours. You don't wait for the world to offer you the life you want. You become the world in which that life is inevitable. And you begin to understand something else, something deeper than theory. You understand why the universe appears inconsistent. To those who are, you understand why some seem lucky, others cursed. It was never about deserving. It was about matching. The field does not calculate worth. It calibrates resonance. And as your own frequency steadies, you stop being surprised. By alignment, you stop marveling at miracles. Not because they're less beautiful, but because they've become your baseline. You've remembered that manifestation is not the exception. It is the natural rhythm of an undistorted signal. So now you move differently. You make decisions not out of fear, but out of alignment. You spend money not to fix lack, but to extend. Abundance. You rest not to escape effort, but because rest is the language of trust. You speak less, and when you do, your voice carries something unmistakable: frequency integrity. This integrity is not perfection, it's consistency. It's how you respond when life echoes an old story. Do you flinch? Do you grasp? Or do you stay inside your new identity and let the wave pass without inviting it back in? That choice, made again and again, is what writes the code of your timeline. You begin to feel less like a person in a world and more like a frequency in a field, shaping, selecting, streaming your experience from within. And this isn't an escape from the body. It's a return to it. You become more present, not less. You smell things more deeply. You taste food without rushing. You listen without preparing replies. Because the version of you who lives in alignment with the field does not multitask the moment. They meet it fully, tenderly, authentically. This is the mark of a sovereign frequency. It doesn't overpower. It includes. It doesn't conquer. It calibrates. You find yourself becoming magnetic, not just to events or outcomes, but to meaning. You wake up and realize you are living the life you once tried to manifest, not because the circumstances are flawless, but because you no longer require perfection to feel fulfilled. You are fulfilled first, and the world has conformed. You no longer carry anxiety like an identity. You no longer introduce yourself by what you lack. You've become someone who speaks from already, not from almost. And the field listens. It bends. Not once, not as an exception, but as a rhythm. This is your new normal. And this normal is anything but ordinary, because you've remembered who you are beneath the programming. You've returned to the origin frequency that was never absent, only covered by distortion. Now, when fear rises, you don't silence it. You listen. You respond from presence. You don't battle your old stories. You stop feeding them. And they fade. You don't need the universe to prove itself anymore. You've stopped needing signs because you've become the source. And when the world asks, "How did you do it?" you smile, not to hide, but to honor the unspeakable softness of the truth. It wasn't a formula. It was a return, a remembering, a choice to stop chasing the dream and start becoming the version of you who dreams like a signal, not a wish. You live now not as someone hoping to arrive, but as someone whose frequency is the invitation. Something remarkable begins to happen when you've held a new frequency long enough, not by clinging to it with white-knuckled affirmations, but by living from it with unshakable softness. You begin to feel less like someone sculpting their life and more like someone revealing it. You no longer ask, "What should I do to manifest this?" Because you've stopped using action as compensation for doubt. You act, yes, but your actions are no longer desperate attempts to secure a future. They're expressions of a timeline already chosen. A need to hustle, to push, to prove begins to fade. It's not that your ambitions dissolve. It's that their energy shifts. You no longer pursue them like prey. You walk with them like companions. They're not out there. They are with you, in you, as you. And because you're no longer entangled in the story of getting there, you find yourself meeting more of life from the inside out. You wake up differently. You don't check your phone for validation. You don't measure the day by what might go wrong. You begin the morning as a frequency, and from that frequency, time bends. Opportunities no longer knock. They arrive. You no longer need to explain what you're doing. People feel it. Not everyone will understand, but they'll respond. Some will draw closer. Some will drift away. And you'll no longer need to control either, because coherence, like gravity, organizes everything without effort. The right people begin to orbit. Your stillness. The wrong ones stop being attracted to your field, not because you rejected them, but because you stopped emitting the chaos that used to match theirs. You begin to notice how few words are needed when you live from frequency. Conversations deepen, not because you've learned new techniques, but because your presence no longer splits itself between insecurity and performance. You are simply there, whole, true, grounded, and in your groundedness, others remember. Their own. You no longer feel the need to fix or heal people. You've stopped being the rescuer. You are the resonator. You don't teach by speaking. You teach by being. Your nervous system, once jittery with proving, becomes a tuning fork. People begin to settle around you, not because you've told them to, but because the field you carry is clean. And this cleanliness, this lack of contradiction, makes you magnetic in ways you never sought. Life becomes less about goals and more about guidance. Not passive waiting, but dynamic listening. You follow the pull, not the pressure. You trust the nudge, not the noise. And the more you follow it, the more you realize the path is not linear. It loops. It spirals. It reveals itself when you stop chasing and start attuning. You notice that some of your old dreams no longer excite you. Not because they were wrong, but because they belonged to a version of you that needed them to feel full. Now you are full, and your dreams evolve to match your new capacity. You no longer dream to escape. You dream to express. You no longer want success to feel valid. You want success to feel aligned. And alignment, you now see, has nothing to do with perfection. It has everything to do with integrity, the congruence between what you feel, what you choose, and what you allow. That congruence is your signature. That's the code the universe reads. You don't have to get everything right. You just have to stop betraying your own signal. And the betrayal, you've come to understand, isn't in making mistakes. It's in choosing fear when your body knows truth. It's in dimming your frequency to fit someone else's comfort. It's in acting out of delay when you are called to declare. So now, instead of performing growth, you live it. And the growth shows up in tiny, invisible ways. You say no sooner. You rest before burnout. You celebrate without apology. You leave without drama. You speak without armor. You receive without guilt. You make decisions not from lack, but from identity. You no longer wait for the world to confirm your worth. You confirm it with every breath you don't waste on proving. And the field, ever loyal, keeps reshaping itself to match. Your outer life, once scattered with contradictions, begins to stabilize. Not through control, but through coherence. Not through forcing, but through fidelity. The quiet devotion to a frequency that doesn't fluctuate with mood or metrics. You live now with a strange serenity, not because life is perfect, but because you've stopped looking to life to define you. You define life through the signal you hold. You've remembered that you are not here to collect things. You are here to express codes, vibrations, truths, memories etched into your being long before you were born. And these codes do not activate through performance. They activate through permission. When you stop pretending, they awaken. When you stop shrinking, they expand. When you stop leaking your power to timelines that no longer fit, they rise. And this rising is quiet. It doesn't shout. It doesn't demand. It simply emerges, like a melody you forgot you were humming. And when you hear it again, when you feel it moving through you, you don't ask, "What should I do now?" You ask, "What frequency am I being asked to hold next?" Because you know the doing will come, the path will unfold. But the field responds first to who you are, not what you want. You no longer ask the world to meet you halfway. You become the whole. You no longer wait for proof. You are the proof. And everything you once hoped to receive, the love, the clarity, the ease, now arrives not as a reward, but as a reflection. You no longer chase, you calibrate. You no longer force, you flow. You no longer grasp, you guide. And all of it flows from the same remembrance. You are never separate. You are never lost. You are never behind. You are only vibrating on the frequency of a story that couldn't hold your truth. Now you are whole, not in a place, but in a signal. And the field remembers you because you've remembered yourself. Once you've remembered the truth of your frequency, not as a theory, but as a living current moving through your breath, your choices, your gaze, the game of life begins to feel entirely different. The struggle to achieve collapses into the simplicity of attunement. The quest for signs quiets, not because you've stopped noticing synchronicities, but because everything becomes one. Everything you experience now carries a tone, a pattern, a vibration that either harmonizes or distorts. And you, more than anything else, have become a master of noticing, not from vigilance or fear, but from clarity. You no longer try to mold reality from the outside. You shape it from the subtle interior of your being. And that interior is no longer scattered with narratives about effort, worth, and timing. It's clean, still, directed. You no longer wake up in resistance to the day. Your first breath is an act of alignment. You no longer push your body into action out of obligation. You move because you're responding to an internal rhythm, a pulse that hums with the authority of truth. And that authority has nothing to do with dominance. It's not loud. It doesn't demand recognition. It is the soft sovereignty of someone who knows where they are, even when others are lost. You become that presence, not perfect, not performative, but whole. Your thoughts stop running ahead into futures that haven't formed. Your emotions stop looping through pasts that no longer define you. You begin to live inside a kind of timelessness, not because you've left the world, but because you've entered it fully, without distortion. And within this now, you begin to feel something unusual, the end of seeking. You are no longer scanning life for how to be more. You are no longer at war with the moment. You are not bargaining with the future. You are not begging the universe to hear you. You've stopped knocking on doors. You've realized you are the door. You are the opening. You are the threshold through which new realities arrive, not by force, but by fidelity. And that fidelity to your inner frequency, to your embodied truth, has made you a magnet for the version of life that once felt unreachable. But now that you're inside it, you see how close it always was. The life you thought you were building was already waiting. It wasn't far. It was just a frequency away. And the more you dwell in it, not as a visitor, but as a native, the more stable it becomes. You no longer feel like you're balancing a fragile identity. You feel like you're resting into your natural state. And in this rest, everything accelerates. Not because you're rushing, but because resistance has fallen away. Time bends easily when you no longer contradict yourself. Resources arrive without begging when your signal doesn't waver. Relationships flourish when you no longer need them to validate your signal, because your signal is self-sourced. And this self-sourced frequency doesn't isolate you. It connects you. It allows you to meet the world without armor, without filters, without masks. You no longer look for roles to perform. You look for truths to embody. You don't say yes out of guilt. You don't say no out of fear. You move from the center. And the center is calm. The center doesn't rush. The center doesn't seek attention. The center radiates. You've become this center, not a fixed point, but a living field that reorganizes reality with its very presence. And people notice, not because you're louder, because you're clearer. Your words don't aim to impress. They aim to harmonize. Your actions don't strive to prove. They emerge from alignment. And this alignment becomes your way of being, not a practice, but a pattern. You live from it naturally, like breath, like light. And the field, still listening, still reflecting, responds with growing precision. You think of someone, and they reach out. You open to a possibility, and it finds you. You release a belief, and your body heals. You stop chasing money, and it flows. Not because life has finally rewarded your effort, but because you've remembered the truth. Reality is responsive, not reactive. It does not judge, but it reflects. It does not wait. It mirrors now. And now, you've become the version of yourself who lives as if what you desire is not approaching, but already here. And it is. The more you hold that tone, the more undeniable your experience becomes. Not every moment will be blissful. Not every experience will be clean. But your response, your relationship with the moment, will be pure. Not because it's controlled, but because it's chosen. And choice, now, is no longer about right or wrong. It's about resonance. What matches your signal stays. What doesn't dissolves. You don't need to force departures or chase arrivals. You maintain your tone, and the orchestra of life rearranges itself. This is no longer theory. This is your lived experience. You are no longer reading about alignment. You are living it. You are no longer chasing frequency. You are frequency. And the field around you, from the smallest conversation to the largest transformation, has begun to recognize the signal and return to it. You've become a tuning fork for timelines, a carrier of coherence, a walking reminder of what it means to live inside a field of truth. Not abstract truth, but the kind that reshapes the physical world, subtly, steadily, surely. And the more you trust it, the more grounded you become, the less you oscillate, the less you look back, the less you explain. Because those who feel it don't need your words. And those who don't, they will find their own path. You are no longer here to be understood. You are here to be coherent. And coherence speaks in silence louder than confusion screams in volume. You've come to understand this as the real arrival. Not a finish line, not a goal achieved, but a self remembered. A frequency stabilized. A signal so clean that the universe can do what it's always wanted to. Respond clearly, respond deeply, respond now. You used to think manifestation was about creating, but now you know it's about remembering, and remembering so fully that there's no room left for contradiction. The moment you stopped questioning your arrival, life stopped testing your presence. What once felt like resistance now feels like calibration. The echoes of the old world still pass by, but you no longer misinterpret them as setbacks. You see them for what they are, fading signals from a timeline that no longer holds your attention. You don't push them away. You just don't respond. And because of that, they lose their power. They dissolve, not through battle, but through disinterest. This is how the new becomes stable, not by defeating the old, but by outlasting its relevance. Your signal now has weight. It holds shape. It doesn't flutter with emotion or fracture under doubt. It's not reactive. It's architectural. You've become the scaffolding around which a new life forms. But you no longer need that life to look a certain way in order to feel whole, because wholeness has moved inside you. You bring it to every situation now, and what you bring becomes the baseline of what you receive. You speak with less urgency. You pause more often. You listen with your body. And the field, alive with intelligence, continues to shape itself around the stillness you've become. It's no longer a game of leverage. It's a practice of presence. You don't manipulate outcomes. You don't beg for alignment. You embody it. And embodiment is patient. It's clean. It holds its tone through both beauty and mess. Because coherence doesn't mean perfection. it means consistency. And consistency is what teaches the universe who you are. You've stopped using suffering as a sign of worth. You no longer believe that pain is a prerequisite to progress. You've released the myth that struggle makes you more deserving. And in that release, something miraculous occurred. Effort transformed into flow. Not because you stopped acting, but because your actions now ride the current of your signal, not the weight of your wounds. You move with less noise. You receive with less hesitation. You meet change with less resistance. And what once felt like fear now feels like a frontier. Even when uncertainty arises, you don't lose your center, because you're not clinging to an outcome. You're tuned to a frequency, and frequency is not fragile. It doesn't depend on what happens. It determines what happens. You've become a sculptor of the unseen, shaping time and probability, not with force, but with vibration. You think a thought, and space rearranges. You feel a truth, and form follows. Not in fantasy, in physics. You are living the quantum mechanics of identity. You are watching coherence bend matter. And you are doing it not by efforting, but by remembering. You are not just in the field, you are of it. You're no longer waiting for a future to prove. You're on the right path. You've dropped the path entirely and chosen presence as your destination. And presence, as you've discovered, contains everything. It's not the absence of motion. It's motion without misalignment. It's the river without resistance. You flow now, not aimlessly, but accurately. And because of that, reality starts to look like a reflection of your interior, not a test of your value. This reflection shows up in details. In the softness of your mornings. In the timing of your phone ringing just as you're ready to be heard. In the way strangers smile when they pass you. In the way your body begins to respond with more trust, more vitality, more grace. The outer world is no longer a battleground. It's a chorus, singing back what you hum to yourself. You've become a composer of harmony. And harmony doesn't need explanation. It's felt. It's lived. It's witnessed in the way your relationships no longer feel like negotiations. In the way you don't shrink for safety or swell for validation. You stay centered, not rigid, resonant. Your frequency, once fragile, is now fluent. And the field speaks your language fluently in return. You see it everywhere. In the ease of decisions that used to paralyze you. In the clarity that now arises where confusion once lived. In the softness of your no. In the power of your yes. You're no longer choosing from fear of lack. You're choosing from recognition of truth. And that truth doesn't compete. It simply is. The more you honor it, the more peaceful your life becomes. Not because you've removed all challenge, but because challenge no longer disturbs your signal. Even when the unexpected arrives, you meet it with identity, not instability. You ask not, why is this happening to me? But what version of me does this reveal? And from there, you choose, not react, but choose. Because you now understand that life is not responding to your words, or even your feelings. It is responding to your coherence. And coherence doesn't come from pretending. It comes from integrity, the quiet, unshakable alignment between what you believe, what you feel, and how you move. You live from that now. And because you do, time itself begins to shift. You accomplish more with less doing. You feel more with less thinking. You attract more with less needing. Because you've stopped projecting your power onto the future. You've brought it home to the now. And this now, this breath, this frequency, it is enough. It is not a means to something better. It is the thing itself. You've stopped postponing peace. You've stopped delaying joy. You've stopped rationing love. You live now as someone who remembers they are the source. And because of that, you are no longer afraid of being misunderstood. You are no longer afraid of starting again. You are no longer afraid of silence, because silence is where the signal strengthens. Silence is where the truth sings. Silence is where the old noise dissolves, and the new world, the one that matches. Your tone begins to form, not from scratch, but from recognition. You are now living inside the field you once thought you had to earn. You are walking through the frequency you once thought you had to fake. And in every moment you carry the softest knowing. There is nothing left to prove, only something sacred to hold. And so you arrive, not at a destination, but at a depth. The seeking softens, the proving fades. You are no longer waiting for life to begin. You are meeting it as someone who finally remembers. You were never here to chase alignment. You were here to be it. And in being, everything organizes around you, not as a prize for effort, but as a mirror for coherence. You move now not to get somewhere, but to express what's already true. Your breath is enough. Your signal is clear. And as the world reshapes itself to meet you, you realize manifestation was never about calling things in. It was about removing the static that said you are separate from what you already are. This is what it means to live inside the field, not as a visitor, but as the architect. And in this remembering, you become the doorway for others. Your peace becomes permission. Your presence becomes invitation. And your frequency, steady and soft, becomes a new kind of gravity. Let it hold you. Let it guide you. Let it become your home. Subscribe to our channel so we can meet again next time. Other stories are also waiting for you, all tuned to the rhythm of who you've always been.